Well, good afternoon from Umberto in Chaminala. As in the title, I have three objects in three different states of varnishing, polyurethane lacquering. This is from scratch. It has been sandpapered up to 800 grit in every and each small detail of the shape. And the 800 gives me a very smooth surface, but still rough enough to have a good grip for the varnish for the lacquering. This devotional sculpture I found on the market that was plain wood, carved wood, hand carved, also signed by somebody, maybe in Thailand. And I just gilded and started to give some hands of polyurethane in order to make it washable and more shiny and possibly more beautiful. So this will just need an intermediate layer of varnishing. And this one instead, it's the final. This has been sandpapered after 5 coating of polyurethane, each one followed by 800, and then the last two by 1000 grit. On this one, I really hope I can give the final polyurethane lacquering. It will be followed by a very light polishing with some paste. Okay, let's go. The polyurethane, I'll start with Ganesh, like every good work, is to start with the Ganesh invocation. Oh. And, or better, we start from preparing the varnish. Actually, luckily, the polyurethane is much easier to mix. It's more liquid than epoxy resin, and then it requires a 30, 35, 40% of thinner, so it's very liquid and it's very easily mixed, the hardener and the base resin. So this is nearly ready. Only need to add a little bit of gold dust to make it sparkling. Very little bit. I can collect it on the top of this. Much less, just like this. And you see a very little bit, because I don't want the varnish to be at all opaque. But I want that in the transparency there are points of gold shining. Being this gold colored alloy very light, it requires quite more mixing than the resin itself, because it has kind of soak before it starts floating in. Other way, it has the tendency to stay on the surface because of superficial tension. So this has to be mixed quite well. It will be anyway mixed when you go in with the brush, but then some brush stroke will be more gilded than other. Better to mix it thoroughly when it's all together, so to obtain. Still I have some part floating. You may think this requires patience, and it's true, but nothing in front of sandpapering grit after grit all the surfaces of these very quite complex forms. But after all, it's a nice satisfaction. So we got the varnish ready. Brush as well. And we start garnish. I really hope this layer will be enough to make it shiny and waterproof, because the original wood was terribly dry, terribly dry, and it has been absorbing. I think this is the fourth layer I'm giving to this sculpture, the fourth layer, and still the wood is absorbing almost immediately the varnish. It's still a very high level of absorption. Instead of creating a skin, the varnish it's literally drinking by the wood. Anyway, lacquering work, it's always a question of layers, layers and layers. The more you're able to give thin layers and multiple, big number of layers, each one very thin, and the better the lacquering will look. And the most classic lacquering resin, which is shellac, has some advantage, mainly in terms of drying time. You can go one layer after the other in a very short time, as it is tinned with in our tradition, with ethylic alcohol. And ethylic alcohol, being very volatile, will dry very soon, so you can go one after the other with the layers. But on the contrary, it's very difficult with the traditional natural shellac to get the layers thin, because it is pretty thick material, unless you go by very, very diluted. But when it's very diluted, also its strength diminish, so you're not very sure of the persistence of too much diluted shellac. Polyurethane, on the contrary, has the ability to create itself very, very thin layers, very thin, so that you can notice it also by the consume of the resin. I always make this very small amount, notwithstanding I have many objects to paint, because it has a very high covering. With a little like this, you really cover a lot of surface. So this is the advantage of the polyurethane. And then another advantage, that unless you find so-called angel shellac, which is pink, nearly white, but anyway, never so much transparent like polyurethane can be. I mean, unless you find that shellac, the angel one, the white pink one, the shellac will always give a tint to the support you apply it to. It will give a tint of very warm and yellowish color, which might not be a problem, or better, it's usually an advantage when you deal with furniture or wooden stuff. It is not when you deal with painting and colored stuff, because the applying of shellac will drastically modify the tonality of the object. Well, polyurethane is very, very transparent and very, very sharp, very brilliant when dried. So Ganesh got this. It's not the last one. I think he will need one more layer to be in its good shape. At the moment we put it to dry. Yeah, nice looking, nice looking. And now we go from to the work from scratch. Just received the first layer, first of 4 or 5. And this layer is the one supposed to reveal if there was any forgotten corner in the sandpapering, because this first layer will bring in evidence any defect in the surface. Some of the eventual defects will be later on corrected with the augmenting of the layer of varnish. Some other, if they are too deep, will have to be corrected before proceeding with the varnishing. Also, this one will be the fixing for all the gilding. That will be regilded one more time before the final. So better between this layer and the next one, I will proceed to a further refreshment of the gilded part, because this layer of polyurethane will avoid that the new water-based layer of gold will not move the background under stain water paint. Once, in this case, the polyurethane works as a fixative. Actually, the gilding is already pretty good, pretty satisfactory. I was able to make my hands sticky, as always when dealing with resin. I don't like to have sticky fingers, maybe when I work. So, keep this terrible diluent, terrible thinner. This eats everything. Epoxy, polyurethane, play dog, isopropylic alcohol, not everything. There we go. Where were we? We were on this side. This is one of the two most emotional part of the work. Besides those of modeling, of figuring out the balances and the relations between empties and full, filled. But this one is the one that starts to show you the final aspect of the surface, of the effect and nuances of the wood and the resin becoming transparent. Another moment is when you apply the last layer and you start seeing, or better, when you polish the last layer and you see the object taking its final form. Yeah, it seems there are not much defect. There is a nice transparent that allows to see the signature on the bottom. And yeah, but I did the lower part, but also the upper part. This is the upper part. We start from the top. Per andare bene con questa luce dovrei trovarmi dalla vostra parte, ragazzi. Perché la parte in cui mi trovo vedo proprio un accidente. Meglio vedevo finché si trattava di lavorare sul chiaro, ma adesso che sto lavorando sul nero non vedo praticamente nulla. Fortunatamente ormai conosco questa forma talmente a fondo, posso andare anche di ritentiva, come si suol dire. Ok. E anche questa dovrebbe essere at a good point. Ci rimane questa terza e spostare questa in modo più alto. Allora, ecco il bottone troccolo. Bottone troccolo. Invece partiamo dall'alto. Adesso vedete come la resina con la vernice diventa trasparente, rivelando un vero e proprio universo di eventi al suo interno. Composizione di sassi, di ghiaia, i resti di un fiore miseramente perito nell'esperimento e successivamente erosi con vari procedimenti chimici, in modo da lasciare soltanto il vuoto in questa struttura che era l'ebollizione di un surplus di resina da un mio lavoro sui tavoli. Mi dispiaceva abbandonarla, così la gettai in uno stampo improvvisato con un modello altrettanto improvvisato. In effetti di quello che era l'apparente intendimento dell'esperienza non si è ottenuto altro se non un blocco dal quale mi sono poi studiato di ricavare qualcos'altro. Spero davvero di poter considerare finito questo pezzo una volta dato questo strato di lacca. Solo un passaggio di lucidatura con la crema. Questo diluente è precisamente piacevole da respirare. Bei tempi in cui il pittore si faceva di trementina, di pura gemma di pino. Noi siamo tutti in nitrodiluente, esteri e whatever it is. Trementina è diventata una cosa introvabile. Pensate che qui non c'è altro che Deodar. In Trentino non c'era altro che l'Arici. Lo fanno loro, ma vengono solo in farmacia. Trementina. Alcune parti difficili da raggiungere. Ok, adesso l'ultimo pezzettino lì, mi sposto però fuori prima di farlo perché sennò poi non so per dove prenderlo. Quindi con queste pennellate c'è questa sessione dedicata a verniciatura poliuretanica a pennello. Andiamo per qua, speriamo che non mi cada. Eccolo là. Ultime pennellate sul top. Iniziamo anche l'argento che non ossiderà. Ok, that's it. Da Umberto in sciaminala con i miei baffi asburgici, come dice Marco, o alla Gengis Khan, come piace pensare a me. Un caro saluto da Umberto, scusate, guardo lì, invece dovrei guardare qui perché voi ne guardate da lì. Va bene. Grazie da Umberto, grazie per l'attenzione, spero che diventiate più numerosi. Ciao ciao.